Rabbi Lindemann and I both grew up in Easton, Pennsylvania, and we both attended B'nai Abraham Synagogue. I became bat mitzvah here on this very bima, right here in this very room, and as did Rabbi Lindemann.
Easton was a wonderful place to grow up, and I think partly because of the era, not just because of the place.
I became rabbi of the synagogue, B'nai Abraham Synagogue, in 1961, and my recollection is standing on the corner of 16th and Northampton Street. And there was young Steven Lindemann standing on the street corner, just at an age just before his bar mitzvah. So I introduced myself to it, your new rabbi, and I talked to him about the possibility of his continuing his Jewish education after bar mitzvah. Steven didn't seem to be slightest bit interested, but somehow we convinced him.
I arranged to teach him Hebrew, starting with the basic books and going on, and we had a deal. I would teach him and he would babysit. We did that for many years, and when he got to a certain point, I turned him over to my dear husband.
I fell in love with him as a teacher and with the study of the text in that way, and I went back as a 14-year-old to sit with kids in a Hebrew school class who were 11 in order to learn the Musaf service that I had not learned before then. And I would say by the time I was 15, I was sure I was going to be a rabbi.
I met Steven in Camp Ramah in the Poconos in the 1960s.
I spent 14 summers on the staff at Camp Ramah in various capacities.
When Steven and I got assigned to guard camping equipment at a far-off camping site, which had a refrigerator freezer with 50 pounds of veal in it, and we had to guard it for a week. So we figured veal, we might as well get some vodka. So we had veal and vodka for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for a week. Steven had his guitar, so we spent our time singing, chatting, drinking, and eating. I was honored, one of the few friends of Steven to know his parents, Goldie and Carl. Carl was hearing impaired, very quiet, but really loved his kids very intensely. Goldie was a character, bigger than life, just a remarkable storyteller and weaver of tales. And if you listen to Steven's sermons, you will hear that dramatic flair weave its way through whenever he speaks.
It was our first day of graduate school at Brandeis University. It was September of 1972, and here we were, a bunch of students who didn't know each other coming together into a program called Contemporary Jewish Studies. Our second year at Brandeis, a bunch of us were thrown together as student interns teaching at Kehillat Israel in Brookline, Massachusetts. Each of us somehow hoping to change and better Jewish life and working with these young kids and making them feel good about going to a Jewish afternoon school with all of the other activities that they had on their plate. There was Steve out there somehow connecting in a very special way with the young people, doing all kinds of innovative projects. Steven, very much sensitive to the group dynamics of this 20-person group, kept quiet his relationship with another woman in the class who wound up being Jane Roberts. And I'll never forget that spring of 1973, when all of a sudden Steve and Jane announced that they were engaged. And we were like, what? We didn't even know you were dating.
When I was accepted to rabbinical school, I had a choice of either starting at JTS in New York or starting at the University of Judaism in California. And one of the individuals on my interview committee was Elliot Dorff, Professor Elliot Dorff, Rabbi Professor Elliot Dorff, who was at the University of Judaism. And he really suggested I give serious thought to coming to the UJ.
So they came out to LA. They had a magnificent little apartment right off Fairfax Avenue. They were 1 block from the kosher butcher, which meant obviously that rib steaks were main thing on the menu.
Steve was my student both in Talmud and in philosophy, he was very adept and very acute, both in analyzing Talmudic arguments and in analyzing philosophical arguments and in creating new ones. So in addition to the warmth of his personality and his Jewish convictions, it was a delight to be his teacher and to be, frankly, pushed by some of his questions. If anything, I learned from him probably as much as he learned from me.
I have known Steven and Jane since 1978, when Steven and I both began rabbinical school at the University of Judaism. And Steven and I, for 3 years together, studied Talmud and studied everything else together. We were a chavruta. It transformed from classmates in the course of those 3 years into friends.
But we came back to New York to finish at JTS, and it was a good experience. When I graduated, I looked at a number of different positions, and the one that I fell in love with immediately was Perlow Sholom Temple in Hampton, Virginia.
Obviously, I was involved in my synagogue when I was growing up, but not to the level that I was involved at Perlow Sholom. And I think that Rabbi was the spark for that.
I worked as the administrator for the synagogue for many, many years while Steven was the rabbi. But we had all of our holidays together and all of our simchas together, and they were our best friends and our rabbi, our spiritual leader, and Jane was the education director.
It was a great place to be a rabbi. And I learned what it meant to work with a board, and I learned what it meant to work with various presidents of the congregation over time.
Steven was more than just a rabbi. He was somebody you could go to talk to about anything. He was kind and smart and non-judgmental about anyone.
When Steven left Virginia and moved to Cherry Hill, I was not surprised that at the ensuing smachot, the ensuing bar and bat mitzvahs, that members from that congregation would come up from Virginia to be part of the celebration. That's how much this particular rabbi is loved by his former congregants and his present congregants.